Well, good morning. How you guys doing? Wow. So really quick, how old are you going to be, Jacob? 32. Wow. I cannot imagine being that old. It's beyond me. Well, we have a children's church that goes on during service. If you want your kids to stay in here with you, that's fine. But if you'd like for them to go and be part of children's church, this is the time too. And so you can meet the teachers in the back and go to the classes. All right. Well, we are in a series called The Greatest Story Ever Told. It's a series about how to tell people about Jesus. And this is actually a perfect Christmas series, because in the book of Luke, at the very beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, what we're told in chapter 2, verse 10 is that an angel told them, "Do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy, which will be for all people. For today in the city of David there has been born for you a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." If Christmas is not about sharing Jesus with people, I don't know what is. We have the greatest news, right? About how God came from heaven to be with us, to restore what was lost, what was broken. But here's the problem. We have this good news, right? We know people need to hear it. We know they need to know it. Our problem is we just don't know how to share it. We just don't know how to tell people. And sometimes, because we don't know how to tell people about Jesus, we can come up with reasons why we don't need to. And one of the biggest reasons that people come up with for why we don't need to tell people about Jesus is what? It's someone else's job. It's the pastor's job, right? Like, that's what we have a pastor for. That's exactly why we pay him. We have this, they're paid to talk about Jesus. They're professionals. And so I'll just leave the telling of Jesus to the professionals. But let me tell you that the professionals are sometimes the worst people at sharing Jesus with people. Professionals and professionals in training. When I planted a church in Missouri, I did it at a gas station. We had all kinds of people there. I've told you about this. We had drug dealers, drug users, prostitutes, gang members, drunks. We had all kinds of people there. Do you know the only kinds of people that we asked to leave? A local pastor and Bible college students. Those were the only people we had to ask to leave the house church. And let me give you an example of why. I had a buddy, Stephen, who was really good at telling people about Jesus. And he worked at a McDonald's in town, and he worked there for a year, and he hated the job. But the reason that he worked there was because he was trying to build relationships with people there to tell them about Jesus. And he had spent a lot of time building up a friendship with one of his coworkers, this girl there. And finally, they were at the place where they were having the conversation about Jesus. And they were on the college campus, and they were talking about Jesus, and things were going great. That is until some of the other guys heard them talking and what they were talking about, and they decided, ooh, a Jesus conversation, I'm going to jump in. And, and what happened was they began to all give their version of Jesus. And they all had something, they were trying to be clever. They were trying to one-up each other. They'd say, oh, well, that's great, but did you know this? Oh, well, that's good too, but did you know that? Oh, wait. I know a better way to tell this person about Jesus. They're all trying to be clever, but let me just tell you, no clever arrangement of rotten eggs ever made a good omelet. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't care what you know or how smooth you are. If you're trying to tell people about Jesus just to inflate your ego, it ain't going to work. They just had to be the person who convinced this poor girl about Jesus. And you know what the worst part was? She was pretty. And so even more guys came over. It was a bunch of horny piranha. And there were like 12 guys sitting around this one girl all arguing and trying to one-up each other and trying to be the guy who had the notch on their belt. And they were all trying to sound smarter than the next. And you could just watch this girl and you could see how overwhelmed she got. And I'm on the couch nearby and I'm watching television, but I'm hearing this mess. And the whole time I'm just praying, God, just do something. A distraction, a miracle, something to save this girl from your followers. And right at that moment, she got a phone call from her boyfriend, and she stepped outside to take it. And as soon as the door shut, I got up from the couch and I went over to them and I told them to take a hike or to go play in traffic or something, because they were ruining what Stephen had been building. I said, this is not about you. This is not about what you know. This is not about what you have to say. This is about a person who desperately needs to hear about Jesus, and you are ruining it. I said, you guys need to leave, and you need to let Stephen tell his friend about Jesus. She knows him, she trusts him, and you are ruining what has been a year's worth of work. And so they all left, and I went back to the couch, and I watched TV, which is where I wanted to be in the first place. And the girl came back in, and her first question was, where did all those guys go? And Stephen said, oh, they all had something to do. And she just said, oh, thank God. And they continued in their conversation with Jesus. And I don't know where that story ended. I don't know where it ended. But at least I know it didn't end there. Whatever happened is between her, Stephen, and Jesus, the way it should have been. But professional Christians can hurt the gospel more than help it, and I'm saying that as a pastor. You throw us in the mix and we start arguing about denominations and interpretations and whatever else, and we can miss the entire heart of the gospel. We can make Christianity a subject to study instead of a life to live. We can make this about teaching the Bible instead of teaching people the Bible, and there's a major difference. Our goal is not to inform people about Jesus. Our goal is to make disciples. And professionals miss that all the time. Jesus said about some professional believers in Matthew 23:15. He said, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you travel around on the sea and on land to make one proselyte, just one convert. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourself. And maybe it's for this reason that when the gospel was first given to men to be preached, he didn't give it to priests, and he didn't give it to Pharisees, and he didn't give it to teachers or scribes. He didn't give it to people who had been ruined by Bible college. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 21 says, for since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. No, the first people that God gives the job of sharing the gospel with men is a bunch of uneducated, lower class, smelly shepherds. And I think that the Christmas story, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, first and foremost teaches that the good news of Jesus is for all people and can be shared by all people. That God doesn't need professional Christians. In fact, the more we try to be professional, the more God has to break us of that. God is looking for people who simply know a good thing when they see it and can't wait to share that good news with someone else. 5 to 6% of people who give their life to Jesus give their life to Jesus, and they attribute that to a pastor. Which is fine. That's great. But 75 to 90% of people attribute their coming to Christ to someone who was their friend or their relative. So if I had to pick who I wanted to share Jesus, I'm going with you guys. I'm going with you guys every single time. You are the best people to share Jesus. But it's my job to help you find that gospel in you and to help you find that way to share your message, the hope of Jesus that you have in you. Make sense? And so what I want to do with you today is I just want to share with you some ideas about how you can have a conversation about Jesus, because sometimes we overthink it or we work ourselves up too much. And these things that I'm going to share today, they're just simple things to give us some confidence and to keep our head on straight as we share good news with people. We talked about prayer being personal and authentic last week. We talked about being patient, and those are good things, but I call those preparatory things. That's what you got to be going into the conversation. That's not actually how you have the conversation. And so we want these things today is about what you need to do actually in a conversation with people when you finally talk about Jesus. And do you know what the very first thing that you need to do when you tell someone about Jesus is? Listen. James chapter 1:19 says, everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. In other words, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Do the math, right? We've talked about that before. The gospel is a conversation. This is not just about you and what you have to say and how other people need to listen to you. This is not about, well, this is what I have to tell people. Oh, I know the right way to do this. I need to be heard. You're not listening to me. The gospel is a conversation. You want to discover more about the people you're trying to win. And one of the best ways to do this is through asking questions. Asking questions of people. Ever notice that when Jesus talks about the gospel, what's he do? He's always asking questions. He says, what's the moral story to you? What does the Bible say to you? How do you see these things? He wants to know, where is this person at and how does he need to direct the gospel in their life? And so ask questions. Ask about family. Ask about jobs. Ask about life experience. Ask people what they think about God. Ask them about their religious experiences. You can find out a lot about where people are at and figure out how you need to address the gospel in their life. And sometimes by asking questions, you learn to dodge some things too. You don't know what kind of baggage someone has had in their life. And maybe when you say something about the gospel, the way you meant it and the way they hear it are two different things because some other church poorly communicated to them. Or maybe they had some abuse in their past. Or maybe they've misunderstood something. By asking the questions, you can learn how to address those things so that the gospel can get in there. And asking questions often brings up awesome opportunities to share what you believe. A friend of mine, Becky, we had this assignment in class where we had to interview someone who did not believe in Jesus. And Becky, if you ever met her, she is like the sweetest, most innocent person in the world. She just has one of those natures where you just go, oh, honey, you know what I mean? She just seems naive. But she decided she was going to go to the one place she was confident that she would find an unbeliever. And you know where that was? The adult bookstore. She walked into the adult bookstore and she talked to the guy behind the counter. His name was Jason. And she sat there and she asked him every question she knew about God. And all she did was listen and write down his responses. And then at the end, she thanked him for his time. But as she got in her car, she felt like the Spirit was telling her something else. And she went in and she said, I have one more question. If I invited you to church, would you go with me? And Jason said yes. And he went with her that Sunday. And he went with her the next Sunday and the next Sunday. And 2 months later, I was there when Jason was baptized. I was there when he called his boss and quit his job. Now he's married, he's got kids. And it all started because Becky first asked him questions. Now, the moral of the story is David is not telling you to go into the adult bookstore. I want to be clear about that. If you struggle with lust, that's the last place you need to be, just as much as an alcoholic doesn't need to be in a bar. But we have to be listening to people in their context if we're going to figure out how to bring Jesus to them. Another thing to remember when you're talking to people about Jesus, and this can go with listening, resist the urge to fix people. One, you can't. You can't fix anyone. Jesus can, but you can't. But two, people are going to have a lot of wrong ideas about God and Jesus. It's just going to happen. They'll get the stories wrong. They'll get the point wrong. They'll have baggage from a church who communicated poorly. You don't have to fix people, but you do. But there are times where you have to adjust the story. A guy once told me that Jesus was a tax dodger. And I said, the same Jesus who said, pay your taxes? Oh, he said that? Yeah. Oh, okay. The times where we have to adjust the story is when it comes central to the gospel. Who is Jesus? What did he do? What did he say? What did he teach? Because you know what? If we can get people to Jesus, then we can work our way out from him. The scriptures point to him. Sometimes we get wrapped up in trying to fix everyone's idea of what the Bible says. And truthfully, there are times when we're wrong, right? Like, have you ever, looking back at your life, and can you remember a time when you used to believe this and you just thought, man, I must have been taking crazy pills or something? Yeah, I mean, we have to be careful that we're not just trying to get people to understand everything we understand. What we need people to do is we need them to understand Jesus. And so we don't need to fix everything. We don't need to fix every idea or thing we disagree with. And while we're at it, something we need to understand is when we're having these gospel conversations, people are going to disagree with you. Think about it. We are telling people that the world that they've grown up with, the world that they know, does not work the way that they've always thought it did. We are saying that their world is upside down. That's not easy to take, and they didn't come to those ideas overnight. They've believed those things over time, and so when you start to share the gospel, it's going to start with disagreement. Because they are hearing something that they are not familiar with, that they don't know, that they don't understand, and they can't see how it works that way. And we have to be careful not to get upset just because people disagree with us. There's this habit sometimes that when Christians have someone disagree with them, you know what they say? I'm being persecuted. I'm being persecuted. And this happens all the time at Christmas, right? Hey, we have to, that they're taking the Christ out of Christmas. They took it out. It's just Mass now. And we got to think about that, because what we're saying is we're expecting people who don't believe in Jesus to celebrate Jesus coming into the world. I'm not a Muslim. Should I celebrate Ramadan? No, it doesn't make sense. People are going to disagree. People need time to process what we're saying. And so don't be shocked that when you tell someone about Jesus, they don't just fall on their knees in prayer or ask where the closest river is to get baptized. It takes time. Another thing to do, respect people and what they believe. Just because we disagree about something does not mean we have to belittle people. What we believe matters to us, and what they believe matters to them. They believe what they do as a result of the logic and reason and experience that they've had in their life, in the same way that we use the logic and experience and reason from our life to believe what we believe. Even if someone believes something crazy, we don't need to talk down to them, because remember, we kind of own the corner on crazy, don't we, as Christians? I mean, we're about to celebrate a time when a virgin gave birth to a man, a God-man, who was a perfect man, who never failed, who never sinned, who dies and rises again. Like, we're all stocked up on crazy, right? Like, do we get that the gospel is nuts? We should. And so what we need to do is we need to find common ground with people. The Apostle Paul was awesome at this. In Acts chapter 17, Paul talked to some people in Athens about Jesus, and they worshiped all different kinds of gods. But Paul's opening statement was not, "Burn, you pagan idol worshipers." That'd be a great start, right? Hey, good morning, burn, right? No, instead in verse 22, he says, "I see that you are religious in every way." He says, "Wow, great, you're religious. You know, I'm religious too." And he respected them, and he respected what they believed, and he respected the devotion they had to what they believed. And then he used that commonality as the platform for the gospel. He found common ground with them. They were all religious. And that's what we need to do. We need to try and find that common ground with people when it comes to Jesus. What is that one place? Maybe they got a problem with the church. Great, me too. Let's talk about Jesus. What do you think Jesus would want them to do? We can find that common ground. Just a couple more things. Just because someone doesn't believe what you have to say does not mean they'll never believe. Just because someone doesn't believe what you have to say does not mean they'll never believe. It may mean they need time. It may mean they need to hear it from someone else. Or it may mean that they will reject the gospel. And that's something we have to be prepared about. We have to be prepared for the idea that someone will not accept Jesus. What did Jesus say? Did he say many will be saved? No, he said few. The road is narrow to salvation, and the way is broad to destruction. And so don't take it personal. It's not really you that they're rejecting, it's Jesus. They reject you because of him. You just keep loving them consistently and keep praying for more opportunities to share Christ. And always be rethinking about how to tell someone about Jesus. I know that there are people who have rejected Jesus more because of the way I said it than because of who Jesus is. And I think sometimes we don't take enough ownership of ourselves and what we say. We just say, well, I told him the truth. Well, I've told you before, love without the truth makes you a hypocrite, right? But the truth without love makes you a jerk. We have to come back and always be rethinking, how did I tell it? And always be trying to find another way. It's my job to make sure that Jesus is the only reason that these people reject the gospel. He has to be the sword that divides, not me. But finally, let me tell you what I think is the best thing you can be when you tell someone about Jesus. You know what that is? Passionate. Passionate. John Wesley is credited with saying, "Set yourself on fire and people will come from miles to watch you burn." Who Jesus is and what he means to you and what he's done for you and how he has impacted your life and how overwhelmed that you are with what Jesus has done for you will speak louder than any argument you can give, any cleverness you can have, any speech that you could write. Who Jesus is to you and how he impacts your life is the determining factor of whether or not people want the good news that's in you. If he doesn't matter to you, then it's not going to come out that he should matter to anyone else. And maybe this is the problem that we've had sometimes. Maybe our problem is we've lost our passion for Jesus, that we are no longer connected to Jesus, that we've gotten out of touch with that hope and that joy and that awesome moment of when we first came to Jesus. And maybe we need to reignite that passion again. Maybe we need to come back to why we need Jesus. We need to go back to that moment of where we gave our lives to Christ, of where we died to ourselves and rose again, and remember why we do what we do. And maybe this is why David in the Psalms wrote in Psalm 51, "Restore unto me the joy of my salvation." And then in the very next verse says what? Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will be converted to you. Unless it comes from me and my story and how I need Jesus and how Jesus has changed me, and unless I'm connected to the very real truth that without Jesus, I deserve the wrath and the judgment of God. That as Paul said, that Jesus came to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. Unless it comes from me and my salvation story and how Jesus impacted me, and unless that is the source and the energy and the life of what I have to say, then it won't mean anything. It won't mean anything to anyone. Jesus can only be good news for other people if Jesus is good news for me. And we're going to take communion right now, but this is what communion's about. 1 Corinthians 11:26, we're going to read this verse about every time we're in this series. Paul says that, so often as you eat this bread and you drink this cup, you proclaim Christ's death until he comes. Every time we come to this table, it is all about coming back to the salvation of Jesus that exists within us so that we can share it with someone else. This is all about setting ourselves up to take in the body and to take in the blood and to then become representatives of Jesus to the world around us. And last week we asked for you to turn in connection cards about people to pray for, and I want you to keep doing that. We got some cards in, and we are praying for those people who need Jesus. But we need to take that to the next step. I think we need to find ways like Stephen to look in the context of the world we're in. You all have different jobs in different places. Why are you there? What are you trying to do? Is it just to have a house or to make money? You know, not all of us like our jobs. Stephen hated his job. There wasn't a day he left the college to go to McDonald's that he was thrilled. But what if we started looking at the context of our lives as a mission field? That our relationships aren't simply to get a job done, simply a way for us to make money, to make ends meet. I mean, that's nice. But what if it became about something more? How would your life, how would your job, how would your friendships, how would your family look if you always looked at them through the lens of Jesus? How would that shift the way you think about the people you work with? How would that shift the way you live in your marriage? How would that shift the way you raise your children? How would that shift how you interact with the person at Walmart? And I don't know. I don't know who those people are. This is why you guys make the better missionaries. This is why you guys make the better gospel tellers. You know who most of my friends are? And last I checked, a lot of you are saved. And so I have to find ways to go out of my way to do that. But you guys are in a world where most of your contacts, most of the people you work with, most of the people you know don't have that context to Jesus. And so who are you going to be? And who are you going to share with? And how intentional are you going to be in this? Next week, we're going to talk about different ways to talk about Jesus and to bring up Jesus, because not all of us do it the same way, and thank God. But we're going to be talking about ways that we can continue to develop this conversation. Because I firmly believe that the gospel is good news for everyone. And I firmly believe that you all are the best people to share it. So I'm going to pray, and while Tim's playing, we invite you to the table. And if you don't know Jesus, then let's start there. If you don't know Jesus, if you've never given your life to him, if you've never put your faith in him, if you've never died to yourself and risen again, if you've never been baptized, we want to talk to you. We want you to know about the life that's within us and why we are working so hard to figure out ways to tell people like you about him. And so we want you to use this time, if Jesus is someone that you have not given your life to, we want you to use this time to start that relationship. And that can happen in multiple ways. It could start, you could come down here and we can have a conversation. We could go out to lunch after this. As you saw, I'm a big fan of pizza. It doesn't have to be pizza. And if we're going to talk about Jesus, I'll even go so far as to say I might eat fish. Okay? I might. Like, let's not push it. But if I have to, I will. But we can talk about Jesus there, or you can talk about Jesus with one of the people here, or maybe if you're just wanting to start that conversation, you could write it down on the connection card and turn it in. If you are a believer, still write down on those connection cards about people that we're praying for, that we want to know Jesus and to know the life that's within him. This is also time for offering. You know, Christianity is often called spiritual warfare, and I've never seen a war happen that didn't require funding. And so this is a time for you to be thinking about your gifts and your offerings to God, what God can do with your finances to help move the kingdom forward. We don't just give to give. We give because we're on the mission of the kingdom. And we want to see what God's going to do with all of us, not just some of us, but all of us in every area of our life. But no matter what's on your heart, this is a time for you to come to the table, to eat, to drink, and to proclaim the death of Jesus until he comes. And so I'm going to pray, and whatever's on your heart, this is the time. God in heaven, thank you for today. Thank you for the good news of the gospel, and God, thank you for using the foolish to make your wisdom known. Ultimately, that's the point. That when the gospel takes hold in someone's life, all that can happen from that point forward is from you. And while you use us ultimately in the end, it can only have really been you and your spirit convicting and your word guiding and your Jesus saving. And so, God, continue to use the foolish and do something wonderful. And God, we lift up the people who we've been praying for over the last couple weeks. God, bring them home to you. Help them understand. Give us words to speak. Help us to be patient. Remind us to listen. Help this be about you. God, we love you. We praise you. We thank you. In the name of Jesus. And ask all these things in his name. Amen.